Imagine standing before countless doors. Every door promises happiness. Every desire whispers, choose me. Life often feels like an endless series of choices, but beneath every choice lies a deeper question. What's the greatest claim over my heart? Because every human being ultimately lives for something. The Qur'an points to this reality when it asks, have you seen the one who has taken his own desires as his God? That question brings us to one of the most profound concepts in Islam, Tawheed. It's often translated as the oneness of God, but Tawheed is far more than a theological statement. It's the presiding idea of Islam, the central reality that gives meaning to every belief, every act of worship, and every aspect of life. There is far more to Tawheed than any single episode could cover. In this series, we'll explore the three categories of Tawheed, but in this episode, our focus is on the heart itself, on Tawheed al-Ulūhiyyah, and the inward acts of worship that belong to Allah alone. Because the opposite of Tawheed not always obvious. Sometimes it hides where no one can see, deep in the human heart. The Arabic word Tawheed comes from the root wahad, a root that revolves around the idea of oneness. But there is an important difference between saying something is one and making it one. The Arabic word wahid simply describes something as one. Tawheed, however, it's an active expression. It means to single something out, to distinguish one out of the many, to recognize that it alone possesses qualities that nothing else can share. This distinction is essential because Tawheed is not merely saying God is one, rather it's recognizing Allah as the one who deserves everything that belongs exclusively to Him. It's to single Him out completely, not only in belief but in devotion, not only in words but in the deepest movement in the heart. For this reason, Muslim scholars define Tawheed as singling Allah out in everything that belongs exclusively to Him. This includes His Lordship, His exclusive right to be worshipped, and His perfect names and attributes. These are not separate beliefs, they are three perspectives of the same reality, and understanding their relationship allows us to understand why the Qur'an presents Tawheed the way it does. The first is known as Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, the oneness of Allah's Lordship. The word Rabb is often translated as Lord, but its meaning is far richer than any single English word can capture. It refers to the one who creates, owns, sustains, governs, nurtures, and brings everything to its completion. Nothing exists independently of Him, nothing escapes His knowledge, nothing happens outside of His will. He alone gives life, He alone causes death, He alone provides sustenance, He alone controls the affairs of the heavens and the earth. Everything ultimately comes from Him. Every created thing depends entirely upon Him. This is Tawheed al-Rububiyyah. At the first glance, that may seem the central message of the Prophet ﷺ that he spent 23 years teaching. Many people imagine that his mission was simply to convince people that Allah existed. But the Qur'an tells a very different story. Again and again, Allah asks the Prophet to question the people around him. Who created the heavens and the earth? Who provides your sustenance? Who controls life and death? Who governs the universe? Again and again, the Qur'an tells us that their answer would be, they would say, Allah. This is one of the most surprising realities in the Quran. The pagan Arabs did not generally deny that Allah was the creator. They acknowledged that He alone created the universe. They acknowledged that He sustained it. And yet, despite affirming all of this, the Quran described them as mushrikun, those who associate partners with Allah. Why? Because acknowledging Allah as Lord is not the end of Tawheed. It's the beginning. Recognizing who created you naturally leads to a greater question. He alone created you, sustains you, and He alone controls your existence. Then who deserves your worship? That is where the Quran shifts from lordship to worship. That brings us to the second dimension of Tawheed, Tawheed al-Ulūhiyyah, the oneness of worship. If Tawheed al-Rububiyyah answers the question, who is your Lord? Then Tawheed al-Ulūhiyyah asks something even more personal. Who has your heart? Because the greatest question in Islam is not simply who created you, it is whom you worship. This is the message with which every prophet was sent. Allah says in the Quran, we certainly sent to every nation a messenger, saying worship Allah and avoid the Tawheed. Notice that the prophets did not begin with proving that Allah exists. They called people to worship in Him alone. This is because acknowledging Allah's existence is not the same as directing your life entirely to Him. This is beautifully summarized in the testimony of faith. La ilaha illallah. There is no deity worthy of worship except Allah. This statement is carefully constructed. It begins with negation before affirmation. There is no deity. Every false object of worship is first removed. Only then comes the affirmation, illallah, except Allah. This is the very structure of Tawheed. The heart cannot be devoted to Allah while it remains occupied by rivals. Before affirming the truth, falsehood must be rejected. The Qur'an presents this pattern repeatedly. When the Prophet Ibrahim ﷺ addressed his people, he declared, "Indeed, I disassociate myself from what you worship, except the one who created me. Indeed, he will guide me." First came disassociation, then devotion. First came rejection, then affirmation. This is not simply a formula to be spoken, it's a reality to be lived. But that raises another question. What exactly is worship? Many people hear the word and immediately think of rituals, prayer, fasting, pilgrimage. These are certainly acts of worship, but Islam understands worship in a far broader sense. Muslim scholars define worship as a comprehensive term for everything that Allah loves and is pleased with, whether statement or action, inward or outward. The final distinction is crucial, inward and outward. Some acts of worship are performed with the body, others are performed entirely with the heart. In fact, the heart gives every outward action its value. Two people may stand side by side, performing the same prayer. The movement and the words are identical. Yet one prayer may be accepted by God while the other carries little weight. The difference cannot be seen. It lies within the heart. This is why the Qur'an constantly speaks not only about what people do, but about what they love, fear, hope, trust, and rely upon. Because worship is not merely something the body performs, it is something the heart directs. For this reason, Muslim scholars often describe sincerity, ikhlas, which we spoke about in the last episode, as the soul of Tawheed. Every human being gives his heart to something, or places his ultimate trust somewhere. The real question is not whether you worship, the question is who receives your worship. If these deepest acts of the heart are directed exclusively to Allah, that is Tawheed. If it's directed towards something created in a manner that belongs to Allah, that is shirk. Shirk is attributing to someone or something a share in what belongs exclusively to Allah, whether in His Lordship, His exclusive right to be worshipped, or His perfect names and attributes. It's the opposite of Tawheed, because Tawheed singles Allah out, while shirk gives away what belongs only to Him. This is why Allah describes it as one of the gravest sins and injustices. Allah says in the Qur'an, "Indeed, Allah does not forgive associating part with Him, though He forgives anything less than that for whom He wills." Understanding this changes the way we think about worship. Worship is not confined to outward actions, but inward realities that lie within the heart. Among the greatest of these is love. Love is one of the strongest forces Allah placed within the human heart. It shapes our priorities, influences our choices, and determines what we are willing to sacrifice for. Islam doesn't ask us to stop loving. On the contrary, love is one of Allah's greatest blessings. The Quran speaks of love between spouses as one of God's signs. It commands kindness to parents, praises the love that binds believers together. These are natural forms of love. They are not only permissible, they are part of the human experience Allah created. But the Quran also speaks of another kind of love, a love accompanied with reverence, complete dependence, humility, and surrender. This is the love that belongs exclusively to worship. It's the love by which every other love is measured. Allah says in the Quran, "Among mankind, those who take rivals beside Allah, they love them as they should love Allah. But those who believe are stronger in their love for Allah." Notice what the verse condemns. It doesn't condemn love itself. Rather, it condemns giving created being the kind of love that belongs to the Creator. A love that ultimately governs the heart. A love before which every competing desire is expected to surrender. This is why Allah says, "Say if your fathers, your sons, your brothers, your spouses, your relatives, the wealth you have acquired and the commerce whose decline you fear, and the homes you cherish are more beloved to you than Allah and His Messenger and striving in His cause, then wait until Allah brings about His command." The verse doesn't deny these things are beloved. It acknowledges that they are. The test is whether anything loved more than Allah, because whatever occupies the highest place in the heart eventually directs the rest of life. The deepest love inevitably becomes the highest authority. This is why Tawheed is not merely an intellectual belief, it's an ordering of the heart, a declaration that nothing will ever compete with Allah for its highest love. Love, however, is not the only act of worship performed by the heart. Fear is just as essential. It's part of the way Allah created us. Without it, human beings would ignore danger and walk in fire. Islam doesn't condemn fear. The question is not whether we fear, but what kind of fear governs our hearts. There is a natural fear in every human being experience. Fear of genuine harm and real danger. This is part of human nature. But there is another kind of fear, a fear born from reverence, a fear that arises from recognizing absolute authority, a fear that restrains a person from disobeying the one who alone holds complete power over his life, his death, his provision, and his final return. That fear belongs to Allah alone. Far from weakening the believer, it sets him free. The more the heart fears Allah, the less it becomes enslaved by anything else. It's no longer ruled by the opinions of people or driven by the fear of losing status, wealth, or approval. Its greatest concern becomes standing before its Lord. The Qur'an exposes one of Satan's greatest strategies, making people seem more powerful than they really are. Allah says, "It's only Satan who frightens you through his allies, so do not fear them, fear me if you're truly believers." The believer therefore acts with wisdom and takes the necessary means, but the heart remains attached to Allah alone, knowing that no one can bring benefit or harm except by His permission. When the fear of Allah occupies the highest place in the heart, every other fear falls in its proper place. The same principle applies to reliance. Every person relies on countless means throughout life. Islam doesn't ask us to abandon those means. Rather, it teaches us to recognize that every means derives its effectiveness from God. The believer makes use of the means, but ultimately depends upon the one who created them. This is the reality of tawakkul, complete reliance upon Allah while taking the lawful means that He has placed in the world. The Qur'an repeatedly joins worship with reliance, as though one naturally completes the other. Allah says, "Whoever relies upon Allah, then He is sufficient for him." Tawheed is contradicted when the heart begins to depend on the means instead of the creator of the means. If a person believes that his provision ultimately comes from his employer, his wealth, or any created thing, then his reliance has shifted from the creator to the creation. This doesn't mean the means are rejected. Rather, they are recognized for what they truly are. Means that have no independent power apart from Allah. True tawakkul keeps the heart anchored to the one who alone gives the means their effectiveness, because the one who truly knows his Lord ultimately entrusts all of his affairs to him, while faithfully taking the means that he's placed in the world. The same is true of obedience. Human beings obey many legitimate authorities throughout their lives, but every created authority remains subject to the authority of the Creator. No command can be obeyed if it requires the disobedience of Allah, because ultimate obedience belongs to Him alone. The Quran teaches ultimate legislative authority belongs to Allah. Allah says in the Quran, they have taken their rabbis and monks as lords beside Allah. When this verse was mentioned, the Prophet ﷺ explained that they didn't worship their religious leaders by bowing to them. Rather, when their leaders had declared what Allah had forbidden to be lawful and what He made lawful to be forbidden, they accepted it. That was their worship of them. This is what contradicts Tawheed, giving a created being Allah's exclusive right to determine what's ultimately lawful and unlawful. Love, fear, reliance, sincerity, obedience, these are not merely emotions or moral qualities. When directed to Allah as they ought to be, they become acts of worship. Together they form the living reality of Tawheed al-Ulūhiyyah. For this reason, shirk is often far more subtle than people imagine. It's not always a matter of bowing before an idol. Sometimes it begins when the heart gives something created what belongs only to Allah. This is why protecting Tawheed requires more than guarding our actions. It requires guarding the heart itself, for it is within the heart that worship truly begins. This is why the Prophet ﷺ warned that shirk can be so settled that would escape our notice. Shirk among you is more hidden than a crawling of an ant. Now to the final dimension of Tawheed, Tawheed al-Asma wa Sifat, the oneness of Allah's names and attributes. And Tawheed al-Ulūhiyyah answers the question, who deserves your worship? Then Tawheed al-Asma wa Sifat answers another question, who is the one you worship? Because true worship is inseparable from true knowledge. The more you know God, the more sincerely you worship Him. The Qur'an therefore doesn't merely command us to worship Allah, it introduces us to Him again and again. It describes Him through His beautiful names and perfect attributes. He is Ar-Rahman, the entirely merciful, Al-Hakim, the all-wise, Al-Alim, the all-knowing. Every one of His names reveals another aspect of His perfection. Every attribute draws the believer closer to his Lord. For this reason, Muslim scholars explain that Allah is to be described exactly like He is described Himself, without denying His attributes, without altering their meanings, without asking how they are, and without comparing Him to His creation. The Qur'an beautifully combines both principles in a single verse. There is nothing like unto Him, and He is the all-hearing, the all-seeing. The first part explains Allah's absolute uniqueness. There is nothing like unto Him. The second affirms His perfect attributes. He is the all-hearing, the all-seeing. Neither resemblance nor denial. Rather, perfect transcendence together with the perfect affirmation. This balance protects the believer from two opposite errors. One, imagine Allah to be like His creation. The other strips Him of the attributes by which He made Himself known. The Qur'an rejects both. It teaches us to know Allah as He revealed Himself. Knowledge of Allah is therefore not an abstract theology. It shapes the way we live. Everything returns to knowing the one whom we worship. And this brings us back to where we began. Tawheed is not merely believing that God is one. Even the pagan Arabs acknowledged much of Allah's lordship. The real transformation came when a person recognized that the one who alone creates is also the one who deserves every act of worship, and that the one who deserves worship is known through the perfect names and attributes by which He revealed Himself. These are not separate ideas. They are three dimensions of the same truth. You know Allah as your Lord, you worship Him alone, and you know Him through His perfect names and attributes. This is Tawheed. It's the foundation upon which every prophet built his message. It's the first right of God over creation. It's the heart of Islam. Assalamu alaikum.